Hello and welcome to another session of Groundbreakers Live. I'm your host Javed Mohammed, and we're very honored to have with us today Debra Lilley, who is an Oracle ACE Director. She is the past president of the UK Oracle User Group. She's the Accenture HCM Practice Lead, and she's got a much longer bio, but in the interest of time, I'll skip that. Debra, welcome.
Thank you very much.
I love your backdrop. I think we were talking a little bit off camera, but it looks very picturesque, even though it's just a fireplace.
It's quite funny. Those are real sunflowers from my garden, and they were blown over last weekend by a storm. So I just brought in the last of them.
Nice.
But it's very cheerful, yeah.
Wonderful. So you're going to be presenting at the EMEA 2020 Groundbreakers virtual tour. And you have a session there, Cloud Applications Back to Basics. And somehow it just kind of caught my attention because I always like getting back to basics. So give us a sense, like what kind of caused you to actually come up with this session, and then let's delve a little bit into it.
Actually, I've been giving this presentation for about 7 years. However, it changes every time I give it. But it started off by when Oracle were first writing their cloud applications, the Fusion application suite. I had the privilege of working with development on behalf of user groups. And I was a real advocate for what they were doing, and I would talk to my fellow ACE directors about it, and they would say, oh, so which schema are they using? And does it still have forms in it? Oh, what's the reporting tools going to be, etc., etc. And I sort of put together a small presentation that sort of did that, what were the design principles? How was it sitting together? And, what sort of technology did people who thought they were going to be using this, what did they need to know? And as time has gone on, because the original releases weren't cloud, they were on-premise. So it was all Fusion middleware to implement. But as time went on and it became cloud, and we got this, cloud as a black box, you can't go into it. And Oracle sell it as a solution to the business, and that's fine. But the people who actually run it want to know what's there. They're used to looking after their on-premise applications, and they want to understand the different components. So that's what I do. I take that black box and I lift off the covers, show them what was there.
So this is probably a natural segue into that. So take us under the hood. So if we open up this black box, what do we see?
So if you've come from eBusiness Suite, the schema looks very similar for objects, for the objects, the data objects. However, all of what we would have called the FND tables, all the system tables are very, very different. The way that flex fields work is similar, but the limits on them are completely different, and they're much more configurable. I have a quick look at, there is one workflow that can be changed, and that's around approvals. And the flexibility of that is amazing. But in general, you can't go in and change workflows, just that one. And just look at all of those different things, the different ways that data is presented. So they have transactional views for reporting from. The fact that S-Base is embedded into the system. So all of these different things, this isn't just a modern version of eBusiness Suite or PeopleSoft. It's taking the best concepts from all of the applications that Oracle own in their portfolio and bringing that into a modern application.
Okay. So while you were talking, it was just kind of going through the back of my mind. It's like, to use I don't know how good the analogy is, of driving a car. You don't need to know what's under the hood to understand. To drive a car, you don't necessarily need to know the workings of a car, but it's helpful. And I'm just wondering if there's a similar parallel in the cloud versus on-premise comparison. Are there some best practices that it's just kind of good to know of, because I'm sure there are similarities, but then the differences between them.
I think the people who manage it appreciate it more. And the picture, I've never thought about it that way, but the picture that came into my mind is I live near the sea, and every weekend bikers go out with their motorcycles, have a lovely run out around the coast, and then they stop in a car park and everybody goes and looks at everybody else's engine. Right? They're not there to tinker with them. They've not come with a toolbox. They're not going to get the opportunity to, to rev up one of those engines, but they all appreciate it, and it makes them love it more. And I think that's where I'm coming from. That there's this group of people who always had the ability to go in and modify and had to manage. And even though that's not part of that role now, they appreciate it much more when they understand how it works.
What about the other? You mentioned a little bit about database. So what about some of the other PaaS services that are there, or even in the infrastructure layer? What else do you think people are either curious about, or it'd be nice for them to know?
Yeah, so people want to understand where that's all come from and how it's being used. And for instance, people say, oh, well, if it's got analytics embedded inside, why can't I just extend that the way that I extend OAC? Well, it's not quite the same version that it's based on, but it's you've got this locked box, and so I'm always explaining to people that whilst it might be the same technology that you're using in the PaaS layer, it's not the same instance. So the BPM part that's driving the workflow, that's not the bit if you were using that in PaaS, separate instance. If you're using if you're going to do an extension and you're using Visual Builder cloud service, or you're going to do something in Apex, it's not the same database. You can't extend that database. You do it in a separate one. And it's just explaining those different building blocks and what you can and you can't do. And it really, it's just, they don't talk about it in the sales process. And I find people really appreciate, they've got, if you've got a natural curiosity about what's going on, you look after something better, I think.
And are there certain kind of like design principles or things for people just to be aware of when they're going about building a solution? Is there a different approach that people should think about?
So interestingly, you're not building the solution. You're configuring a built solution. So it already exists. You're configuring it, and that's a functional consultant's role. But if you need to extend it by using the PaaS, you're going to go to a coexistence model. So instead of customizing, which is what we always used to do, instead of customizing, we're going to build an extension in PaaS, and we're going to coexist those two applications. So by understanding the building blocks and what the constraints are within the application, you can build the right kind of extension to make that work seamlessly. So from a developer's point of view, it is quite important, yes.
All right. Well, Debra, it sounds like a fascinating presentation. I have to ask you one last question, which I like to ask, I guess, because we're kind of meeting virtually. So we were talking off camera, you live outside Belfast. If someone was to be visiting that area, and I'm sure there's probably many things to do out there, many foods to try, but if there's like one thing you would recommend them to either try out or some food to check out, what would it be?
For me, it's the coast. I'm a diver. I love to be in the sea, but even if you don't dive, just our coastline is beautiful. Yeah, it's just absolutely beautiful.
Well, perhaps maybe next time when I interview you, this is our first interview that we're doing, perhaps we'll change the backdrop and we'll get a view of that.
I will do, yes. Be lovely. Thank you.
Well, Debra, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you, and wish you all the best.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.